Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Janine Harry, a communication scientist by profession, here to give you communication tips and self awareness strategies through conversation. So, thank you so much for joining me. And in today's particular YouTube video, I am going to be discussing the power of choice in interpersonal communication. So, let's get right into it. Now, first, it is really important to know the differences between interpersonal communication and intrapersonal communication. And it is the latter that we are discussing today, right? Which is intrapersonal communication. But let's first get into these key differences. Okay, so interpersonal communication, on the one hand, are communicative events that are had with other people. Okay, it can be a conversation that you're having with a family member, a friend, a colleague, a supervisor, and so forth. These types of communicative events can be both face to face or it can take place online, it doesn't matter. It can even be verbal as well as non verbal. However, the primary characteristic of interpersonal communication is the fact that it is taking place between you and somebody else. Okay, it takes place between you and somebody outside of yourself. Now, intrapersonal communication, on the other hand, is communication that we have with the self. Okay, it's most often referred to as self talk. And this particular internal dialogue, known as self talk, is governed by our emotions, the way we think, and the choices that we make. So think about it this way: the way we feel governs the way we think, or the way we think governs the way we feel. And this all basically governs the choices that we make therefrom. Okay? So, interpersonal communication is communication that we have with other people, whereby intrapersonal communication, on the other hand, is communication that we have with the self. It is self talk, it is internal dialogues that we are having with ourselves. So, now that we have a sound understanding of the differences between interpersonal communication and intrapersonal communication, let's speak a bit about the discourse surrounding the two. Now, it is my subjective opinion that interpersonal communication is definitely improving within society. It might not be perfect and it will never be perfect, but it is improving because, for the most part, so many people are becoming more mindful about their communicative practices and the way they are showing up within communicative events, right? However, intrapersonal communication, on the other hand, is a form of communication that we seriously need to work on. And this is why it is so easy to tell other people something really good. But when it comes to telling ourselves something really good, we struggle with that, right? It's easy to speak life into other people, but it's not as easy to speak life within ourselves. It's not as easy to motivate ourselves. It's not as easy to be our own best friend, right? So, interpersonal communication is something that we are always going to be good at doing for the most part, but we do, however, struggle with intrapersonal forms of communication. And this is largely because of the ways in which we have been programmed. We have been programmed to believe that there is potential in other people, but there is no potential within ourselves. And also, intrapersonal communication is a private form of communication. For the most part, our thoughts, the way we think and the way we feel, it is private. And think about it this way: if interpersonal communication was not private, we would not be thinking half the things that we think on a daily basis. For example, if your negative thoughts was basically public, people would run at the opportunity to tell you, hey, you've got to change the way you think, whereby you would have no choice but to actually think more positively, right? But for the most part, interpersonal communication is private. It's not seen and known by other people. So it's very easy to find ourselves within this perpetual cycle of having negative self talk, negative beliefs, and also making negative choices therefrom. Okay. And I think that it is so important for us to transform our interpersonal forms of communication because all of us know by now that the ways in which we are thinking, our belief systems, and the choices that we make have not been serving us in the best ways possible. And for the most part, many of us are suffering in silence because of the ways in which we speak and think about the self. And I'm here to say that the first step in transforming the ways in which you think about the self and the ways in which you speak to the self is to understand that there is power in choice. So let's get into the power of choice in transforming interpersonal forms of communication, or should I say, intrapersonal forms of communication. You are also going to get really tongue tied when it comes to the two. So, yes, let me say that again. I'm now going to proceed by telling you or basically giving you examples of how you can harness the power of choice to transform intrapersonal communication. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the power of choice is basically when we question every thought and every action at each and every second of the day. Okay, this might be quite difficult to do in the beginning, but over time, questioning our choices will become much easier. Okay, so questioning your choices means before you are about to do anything or while you are thinking something, I want you to ask yourself, is what I'm thinking about or are the things I am about to do, are these things feeding my wounded self or is it feeding my healed self? So let me rephrase that, okay? Are my thoughts feeding my wounded self or are my thoughts feeding my wounded self? Are my actions feeding my healed self or are my actions feeding my wounded self? Now, not a lot of people might know what it means to be wounded or what it means to be healed. So, I'm going to have a brief, in depth discussion about the two. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, our wounded selves is basically the limited self. Okay, this is the self that operates from a space of hurt and traumas whereby our actions are most often self sabotaging. Okay. And our healed self is our expanded self. You know, this is the self that acts in alignment with the best interests of ourselves and of others. Now, I want you to entertain this fact for just a second, okay? I want you to know and understand that you are operating from 2 points of perspectives. This means that you are basically the embodiment of two identities. Your first identity is your wounded self, and your second identity, the one that you should be transitioning into, is your healed self. However, your wounded self and your healed self, they exist simultaneously, okay? They are coexisting with each other. However, you may be more in alignment with your wounded self than you are with your healed self, or you may be more in alignment with your healed self than you are with your wounded self. But for the most part, we are either operating from a space of our wounded selves or our healed selves, or for the most part, a combination of both. Okay? Now, I know that a lot of people may think that, hey, I'm not wounded. I'm not operating from my wounded self. But I'm here to burst that little bubble and to say that each and every one of us has operated or we are operating from our wounded selves. And this is why when I tell you something like anything is possible, you can have anything you desire, you can be anything you want to be, the world is your oyster. When I say that, how do you feel? You feel skeptical, right? You're doubting the power of my words. You're doubting whether it is possible for you to achieve every single thing that you want to achieve. And this is because, for the most part, you are operating from your wounded self. The wounded self is the limited self. It's the self that doesn't believe in the potential of what one can achieve. Okay? It's a very contracted sense of being. Whereby the healed self is much more expanded, you know? It doesn't act or operate from a space of hurt, but it operates from a space of alignment. It's when each and every choice that is being made and every thought that is being thought is within the best interest of the self and also with others as well. Now, I want to give you another little example, okay? So, we can be both aspects of our wounded selves and our healed selves, right? And you can actually see this in other people because, for the most part, we can spot things in other people before we spot it in ourselves. And this is why you may realize that some people can be really nasty and mean, and then in the next moment, they can be really kind and sweet. And this is an example of somebody who's operating from both the wounded aspect and the healed aspects. And this is why they always say that within each and every person, a little bit of good and bad exists. And this is basically the culmination of our identities that are split into two, the wounded self and the aspect of the healed self. Now, when we find out that we are 2 points of perspective, which are basically the healed and the wounded, it is natural to have this inclination to want to get rid of the wounded self altogether. But here's the thing, we need to validate the wounded self, okay? Because the wounded self is our inner child that is screaming for help, that needs our validation. So when you have those wounded self thoughts, such as, I'm not good enough, you shouldn't be, demonizing that because there's a very good reason as to why you may be feeling like you are not good enough. Perhaps you were programmed to believe that. Perhaps somebody told you something that has now made you believe that you are not good enough. So this is not about demonizing the parts of yourself or the aspects of yourself that acts and thinks in wounded ways. You should be validating that part of yourself because if our wounded self is as much a part of us as our healed selves are, then both of those aspects deserve validation. So it's not about getting rid of the wounded self, it's about making that slow transition into becoming our healed self, okay? So for the most part, we will swing back and forth between wounded and healed. But the aim is to get into a perfect space of alignment where we are acting and thinking solely from the space of our healed selves. So, how do we harness the power of choice then to transform our intrapersonal forms of communication? And this is by knowing that we should not be thinking and doing things by default. Think about it this way. For the most part, all of us go through our lives and we go through our days, not even thinking about why we are doing something. We're not even thinking about why we are thinking a certain type of way, right? I mean, do we ever stop to really think about why we are about to eat what we are about to eat? Why we are about to post what we are about to post? Do we ever stop and think about why we are thinking the things that we are thinking? And the answer is a resounding no. For the most part, we do not question our choices in terms of thinking and acting. We just sort of like spiral off and do things by default. So the key here is to question every thought and action. When you are thinking something, become aware of your thoughts and ask yourself, why am I thinking this thought? Is this thought in alignment with my wounded self or my healed self? Why am I about to do whatever I'm about to do? Is this action or activity in alignment with my healed self or my wounded self? When we begin to question every thought and action, this is when we gain greater self awareness. It's when we become aware of the self and of the thoughts which arise within the self. So, the example, if you are about to have an argument with somebody, right? You need to ask yourself, okay, so I'm about to have this argument. Is this argument feeding my wounded self or is it feeding my healed self? And for the most part, it is feeding our wounded selves because our wounded self is the self that gets triggered. But instead of us wishing that away and trying to get rid of this aspect of our wounded selves, we need to validate that. We need to say, well, yes, I'm about to have this argument because I am wounded, because I am triggered. But it is within that moment that you will not go ahead and actually have that argument. You will actually have a moment of introspection, a moment of healing, a moment of rather wanting to find inner peace and inner clarity instead of projecting that hurt outwardly. So, thinking and doing things from a conscious perspective takes a lot of effort. It is a muscle that needs to be strengthened because this definitely means questioning every single thing that we do. even the smallest of things. Okay? So I just want to remind you that we do not rise by chance, we rise by choice. So, guys, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for keeping up. And it is at this point that I'd like to leave you with a quote of wisdom, like I always do. And today's quote comes from Carolina, and she says, "Talk to yourself like you would to someone you love." And of course, I absolutely love that. Guys, thank you so much for keeping up with me and for getting this far. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. You can also follow me on Instagram at Infinity Communications. You can read my blog articles at JanineHarry90.wordpress.com, or you can email me at JanineHarry90 at gmail.com. Till next time, much love.